I read that you have taken up many different roles. Like I think, like I believe that you're a journalist, author, writer, a mother, a sustainability advisor, a speaker, and then the list just goes on and on. So, what has inspired your journey?
My journey was inspired by motherhood. When I became a mother, I started doing a lot of research on what world my children not only would live in, but then would one day inherit. And I found that there were many, many gaps between what we know and how we live. And I felt that the only way to feel empowered and not totally discouraged was to start experimenting sustainable solutions 360 degrees, because we have a problem. We use one word, sustainability, for a million actions. And I am holistic by nature. I have always experienced, and I guess I really learned through my spiritual practices and starting from yoga actually, to interconnect all areas of my being and how we interact with the environment and others, and how there's a system of co-dependency also. And so one problem can be a solution, or one problem can manifest in many, many different ways. And in the same way, one solution can affect many different areas. So I felt like I really wanted to see if I could become part of the solution. So that's where I understood, really, I didn't know at the time, but my mantra was quality over quantity. So less things, but good quality. Then I looked into the chemicals that are usually in our homes. I made sure that there was no formaldehyde, no, and it's present in so many products, from our toothpaste to, you know, the carpets and floorings and kitchens and all the rest. Then I moved into the colors. So what you paint your walls with. Again, there's ways to have naturally sourced paints that is not expensive, and it makes a big difference in the air that we breathe. And the list goes on and on and on. But I started experimenting firsthand how many solutions were available, realizing that I had to actually change my patterns and maybe organize my time better so I could go run an errand in a farther place. And I started using public transport to do that instead of a car. And it felt very good, because after about a year, I realized that I had not gone over budget, and I had amassed a great deal of knowledge, and I'd created a healthy environment. So it was a large amount of research, and that brought me on to actually my first book. And in my first book, I created a cast of 9 so-called unsustainable characters. Everyone is a bit a part of us. And so I created, I described a scene that was not that exaggerated, really. And then I came in a form of dialogue and spoke to my characters, bringing and delivering facts that might help them change their minds. So it turned out to be a very successful book, and that made me deeply happy, because at that point, ego was not part of the game anymore for me. I really was deeply engaged and wanted to make a difference. And that brought me back onto television, where I had been a rock and roll reporter for 12 years. And instead I was given this segment on a very popular program in Italy on eco-behavior. So the first 5 years were really on how to avoid wasting resources of all kinds, and also wasting time and wasting opportunities. And then the second 6 years, because it's now, I've just finished the 11th season, is more on how technologies can also help us scale necessary solutions.
Even change can start in a household, right? So many like unsustainable things, if you think about it, in our own homes.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's
so
surprising.
True.
Yeah.
But really, it starts in your heart. You know, when you have this drive and you feel a sense of urgency, but you don't want to be paralyzed by fear, the only thing you can do is be the change, right?
this also leads us to the second question. Like, and there are also, of course, like people who just continue to ignore the calls that the environment is continuously sending us, right? A wake up call that, and people are still oblivious, right? So how do we make people more aware about this situation, and like how can we make them aware to take more action?
Deniers are deniers, right? They exist in all walks of life. And I'm sure you've met deniers too, people who just won't take what you have to say or what facts have to say as truth. So I've explored many different pathways to try and slip into people's consciousness. And so information, but again, I created this cast of characters hoping that people would identify with them and then would accept what I had to say, having opened a pathway. I hadn't at the time understood that what I was really working on was the power of empathy. But then later, when I was made aware of the fact that an Italian neuroscientist discovered the mirror mechanism, or the mechanism of empathy, I thought, okay, I really want to go meet this man, and I want to understand how he thinks that, does he think that our society needs empathy? And he said, yes, I think our society needs empathy more than ever. And so I started exploring ways of using empathy as a driver of change. Now, the mirror mechanism works this way. If I were to eat something, I don't have a piece of chocolate right here in front of me, but if I were to eat a piece of chocolate right now, you're watching me, and your brain would activate the same areas that activate in my brain when I'm physically eating it. So your mouth would start to water, your brain is mirroring my experience. So my last book, my fourth book, is really about exploring empathy. And I empathize with other people. I empathize with nature. I empathize with myself, because it has to do with caring. Now, of course, you have to be open to that. So going back to the beginning of your question, how do you shift the mentality of the so-called deniers? I hope by critical mass. I hope enough people on this planet figure out that solutions are available. The power of critical mass is explored in many different fields. And I think that's really my only hope. Now, what we care about as citizens is really important to industries and politicians, because we purchase and we vote. So hopefully we will be more and more purchasing things that make sense. And where the problem is there is that often things that cost less are the ones that are most harmful. So again, it's quality over quantity. And there are platforms online that can help you buy better products of all kinds. And then the vote. Will young people need to go vote? We should share our successes, but also our concerns with our community, the importance in this digital age of nourishing a physical community of people. We should start using our hands more, making our things, understanding that, what is in fashion now? Well, do we really want to be chasing fads like crazy and creating a huge stream of issues, major issues, including slavery? If people had that on their label before buying a piece of clothing, I'm not sure they would make the same choice. So communication is really important. But I don't think you can budge deniers from their stronghold unless you work around them. I don't think you can budge a denier face to face. I think that we need to create an ecosystem around them that can, that a beautiful image of many small fish against one big fish. That's an image that I hold dear to me, because I think that that restores hope.
What role can, since you mentioned you were a journalist, what role do you think that the media, especially journalists, can play in driving this campaign for the environment?
So unfortunately, media uses a lot of shock in the front pages, and good news is not as sexy for a media outlet, you know, and that's very sad. They usually relegate good news into supplements, but that's a supplement. It's not on the front page of a newspaper. So you'll read a lot about the wrongs in the world and not as much about what's going on that's positive and that we need to know about. So media has a big responsibility, but it's also in an economic model that doesn't really favor giving us that constructive information that we need, because they don't think it sells. And the other complexity is packing in very complicated facts into a good bite size so that you're not losing people's attention. You probably share this too. I mean, what are your sources of information? How do you stay abreast of what's happening, and where do you look for information? I find that I need to consult many different sources. I would love to have a paper that represents my values through and through, but that's not the case. It's a challenge. I think that journalism as we knew it before, investigative journalism, for example, is expensive. You need to have a reporter out for many months inquiring, and most papers don't spend that money anymore. And so you're fed by news feeds, but you're not witnessing firsthand. So it requires a lot of patience, curiosity, but more than anything, intent. I think that as readers, we need to cast our intent and really call upon what we want to be learning. Because if we're passive recipients, we won't get what we need to gain those tools that then can turn information into action, because that's what we need, right? We need to act upon what we know.
I really agree, because like even journalists in media, they control a lot of the people's mindset, right? So a lot of information you get around the world comes from the media, and like you said, the media sometimes like cannot be too reliable. So what are just like some of the major challenges that you have faced when trying to educate people about sustainability?
Often people think they're too small to make a difference. And so then you say, well, okay, in your life, you know, your life is made of many days. If you take a diet, for example, if you want to lose some weight, or if you want to, that wouldn't be your case, but you want to nourish yourself better, well, you eat more fruit and vegetables one day after another, after another, after another, and your actions become cumulative. And also access to data. Knowing that when you spread a good word, it travels far, especially in the internet age. How many people might become engaged? You know, even the fact that we're having this conversation now, well, that means that Priyanka really went out of her comfort zone, and she looked and she got informed. And, you know, I just think that beautiful things happen in this interconnected world. But one of the main obstacles is that. Another is, I don't have time. So you'll say, well, for example, if you don't have time to source your food from a local street market, there's many organizations that are pretty much farm to home, where you can order it online. Oh, but no one's home to receive my grocery shopping. Well, maybe you can ask a neighbor. And by asking the neighbor, maybe the neighbor will also start eating differently. Another obstacle is cost, and then we go back to the quality versus quantity. And then people think, well, the world is really in such a bad place anyway that I think we're lost. I don't think we're lost. I don't think it's worth living if you feel that. So that's where it comes to really nourishing your soul, your spirit. That can be spending time with friends, laughing, being in nature. There's antidotes to that. But feeling depressed and discouraged is definitely a big obstacle, because like the deniers, you can't get through to the people who feel that way. And they may not want to hear your good sense. They might just want a hug. They might want to understand that you share vulnerability with them. So again, there's ways out, but yeah, that's another obstacle, I think. And then many people just don't understand. They don't understand, more than anything, they don't understand how interconnected things are. Going back to the clothing, for example, they don't understand that of such a low cost is just not sustainable. Someone along that supply chain is getting seriously cheated. Okay, so that's where you get the denial. I don't want to know, because I want to be able to go and run my errands and buy my new dress, and I don't have more to spend than that, and I don't feel like taking an old dress and reinventing it and going to my friend who's good at sewing. So I think lack of drive and passion and curiosity can certainly be a big obstacle.
You have authored books that that really that beautifully communicate the need for the community as a whole to shift towards a more positive manner. So you mentioned that there is an urgency to fill the gap between what we know and how we live. So how do we fill that gap?
By starting with very small things, and by being curious enough to learn the story of our stuff. What is the difference between a zucchini that's grown in on my balcony, because we can also grow food in our, you don't need a big garden to grow some food. You can grow some food on a terrace. You can grow food in shared spaces. You can swap and trade. So filling the gap means wanting to experiment with those simple daily tasks. Filling the gap is also in how you move around. I really stopped using the car in the city. I don't need to use the car. We have a very efficient public transport system. When my route is not covered by that, I bicycle or I walk, and I realize that extra time that I might put into walking helps me think better, because my brain flows. So there's so many side benefits to changing habits. It makes our brain more resilient. So I really applied that philosophy to everything, to how we put together our home, to how we eat, to what we drink, to what we wear, to how we move. So, and it's all possible. You don't need to be a hero to do it. You just need to care enough.
So during the course of several workshops that we conducted, one question that students that have repeatedly asked is that, like, why were the earlier generations so casual and not sensitive towards the environment, and who should be blamed for this current situation? And so how would you answer something like that?
Well, we grew up in an era of relative innocence, though there were great heroes of environmentalism, starting with Rachel Carson and going on to Aurelio Peccei, who started the club in Rome in 1972 and published a book called The Limits to Growth, where they simply equated how much we consume and how long in projection, the finite resources of this planet could go around, right? But that was, again, not very shared information. So the generation that grew up in the 60s, I think, did make a difference in their own way. The 70s were, depending on where you were, but for example, in Italy, I was a child, and we had serious crises. So it was a time of scarcity. And that's where I think many of my good habits were then trained, because I understood that you can really do more with less if you use that less wisely. But then the 80s, which is where I, pretty much became a young adult, was a decade of huge abundance. Everything seemed possible. And I think that people were not as concerned about problems that weren't here and now. Now, why did the Club of Rome fail? That's always been a big question. And because there were major economists and thinkers and scientists who participated in this. So, people who were very well informed were all saying the same thing. There are limits to growth on a finite planet. But what came out, and I think COVID confirmed that, is that our human brain, which is still wired the same way and has been for millennia, has a hard time thinking about the future. So even with COVID, I don't know how you perceived it in India, but in Italy and in the United States, because I was in the United States until the last days of February, and I was sharing conversations with pretty smart people. And we all knew that this was ravaging through China. Did anyone say or think, I'm not going to see you for a long, long time? We were like, oh, I'll see you in April. Oh, yeah, I'll see you. You'll be in Milano for the Salone del Mobile. Oh, or I'll see you in June. You'll be in Italy for... 10 days later, we went into shutdown in Italy. And I was astonished, not only by the fact that I didn't figure it out, but all those other smart people I was talking to didn't figure it out. So that says a lot about the way we think and the way we act. Thinking long-term is just really, really difficult. So the answer to kids who understandably ask, why did the previous generations mess it all up? Well, there's a number of answers. One is the fact that we can't think long-term. The other is that we were very distracted by material abundance without understanding that we were sacrificing natural abundance in such a big way. And is it really worth it? And vested interests and pockets of power, and few people making really important, massive decisions for many, many, many others. Big corporations and, incorporating habits that made no sense, denying truth, because, for example, the whole issue about plastics was made public or was denounced decades ago, but no one thought it was convenient. And there's also a fine line there. Some things need to travel in plastic, right? We know that. How do you separate what needs to travel in plastic from what, the unnecessary use of plastic? That takes conscience. That takes caring. So I don't think it's a generational thing as much as a human makeup. And there are many young people who care. There's also many young people who could not give a hoot. So, it's generational, yes, but I think it's more really about our species. And it's more about, again, hanging out with people who care, but then we have to be very careful not to create silos of, interests where we don't remember and we unlearn how to listen to people who think very differently from us. So what I would answer to those kids is listen to people who are part of the problem and see how you can get into their heads. See how you can maybe debate with them one day. See how you can get them to think differently. Or are they saying something that might help you think of a side pathway? Because the frontal, that doesn't work. We don't want violence. We don't want the head-to-head confrontation, because then, we will probably not feel like we're in the place of power to win. Blaming doesn't help anyone. You know what?
Yeah.
When you blame, you lose all your power because you're projecting all your energy onto someone else. That's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah.
And
And
taking responsibility, of course, I mean, it's understandable that your generation does not want to, is not willing to take responsibility for what you haven't done. But I've asked a lot of people in many different fields how they react to Greta. And in the end, my understanding is that people who are like-minded embrace her as a hero and welcome her and cry when they hear her talk, and they just thank her every moment they can. People who don't think like her or who don't have a window where you can be open to hear that conversation, they shut her out completely. They think she's a nuisance, she's a pain, she's arrogant, and all the rest. And it's deeply annoying to hear that, but one has to listen to that, because otherwise we're not going to, we're preaching to the same choir. So while I think it's important that we give each other strength, and what I really hope is that we visualize one day, and the internet can maybe help us, how many people are actually taking action. And Avaz, for example, is a wonderful organization that I hail and cherish, because they launch petitions and it's become a vast, vast movement. And the amount of followers and supporters they have is huge. So yes, we need to get a sense of how many people are really caring about what we care about. But on the other hand, we have to be aware that blaming is not going to help us. And, Greta does come on quite strongly.
we see so many youths leading their communities towards greater change. So how important do you think the role of the youth is? And what are some skills that the youth should that a person should hone in or have in order to effectively bring about change?
Youth is fundamental. You have the energy and the curiosity and the stamina and the drive and longevity. So you have everything that a movement like what we're discussing needs. I think that the communication skills are really important, not only in words, but also in design. How can you pack information into a graphic, for example, that can have a quick impact? I think that knowing how to do research and being thorough and staying true to the facts is really important. I think that embracing the spirit is really important, because we are holistic beings. We're not only head. Now, if you take any moment where you felt something really strong and you want to process that, if you bring that to the level of thought, you're not processing it the right way. You need to process it at the level of the heart. So understanding how your peers react to something from the heart is really important. We act upon instinct so much more than we act upon our rational thought. So what can trigger that instinct of preserving resources, of preserving, of creating opportunities, the importance of collaboration? That's a really, really big asset. Really learning to create a web of different minds is super, super important. And people who grew up in the older generations are used to the pyramidal structures. You have a boss up here and you're down there, and you're not empowered unless you've really painfully climbed your ladder. No, you need that energy from below to feed the people who are up top. You need a system of exchange and interchange and dynamics that flow in all the different ways. So it's important to be persuasive. Persuasive. It's also important to question, though, maybe an initial idea. The big mantra in the Silicon Valley is learn to fail. I would say that's a very important thing too. Don't feel that your ego is offended if you got something wrong, because no, it's only a sign of intelligence to know how to fail. So I think that all those things combined are great skills that can allow you as a generation to really make a dent. And also find the right way to get information that's a bit uncomfortable to older people, but also be kind, you know, because kindness is a way to get uncomfortable information through. So really trying to approach people, again, from the heart and not, you know, with arrogance.
How does one individual adopting a sustainable lifestyle make a difference? But you know that it's like many drops that make an ocean, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what kind of change can we bring our environment if each and every one of us can adopt a sustainable lifestyle? And how does an individual make a difference?
I think that feeling like your actions are regenerating instead of consuming the environment is a big, big motivation. So we have all this social media. Let's use it for something good, you know? Share your experience. Tell people how it makes you feel. Because again, we're all about knowing and knowing and knowing and not enough about feeling. Of course, you look at the big picture and often it's very discouraging. But then when you go back to the perspective that you have when you're doing something that is good and that makes you feel good, may that be really the main driver of everything else you do. Set challenges out to people. Build your own critical mass. You know, see how many people you can convince. And if you are in touch with people who have embraced sustainable solutions, share this with them.
What is your hope and vision for our environment?
That enough people care, that we bring really this whole challenge to the level of feeling, that we embrace vulnerability, that we understand that we're all in this together. I think that we have enough things happening in the world right now that invite us to really change mentality, to embrace a different mindset. I do feel like there's definitely hope, because every time I lose hope, I find some wonderful organization such as yours or initiative or research, or, you know, there's always some good source of information. So let's nourish our souls and our minds with things that can help us regenerate so we can in turn be regenerative.